If it weren't for your pension, we wouldn't even need you here. That's what Ethan, my own son, told me. The same boy who once slept against my chest, his tiny fingers soft as flower petals. The same boy who used to cry whenever I stepped too far away in the park. The same boy who used to call me Mommy whenever he scraped his knee. That night, he didn't even look me. He said it while standing on the other side of the kitchen, scrolling through his phone, as if it were a simple fact, something obvious, emotionless, like a math equation. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're listening from. You're watching Stories of Mom Donna, where every story reminds us that it's never too late to begin again. I was just income, a monthly number that kept I had a wooden spoon in my hand, stirring the rice so it wouldn't stick. The meat was already in the oven. Sabrina had said she wanted roasted potatoes, so I made those too. It was hot, my back ached, and I'd spent the entire day cleaning and doing laundry because guests were coming over. And still, I smiled when Lila ran in to hug me. She was the only reason I kept going. After Ethan said that, nobody spoke again. She didn't need to say anything. She had already won. I didn't say a single word either. I finished stirring the rice, turned off the stove, and with trembling hands, took off my apron. I couldn't tell if what I felt was anger, sadness, or a deadly mix of both. I went to the sink, turned on the faucet, splashed my face with water. I needed to calm down, not in front of them. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the same bed that had once been mine and Walter's, my late husband. For almost 40 years, that room had been ours. Now it barely belonged to me. The walls no longer felt like mine. My belongings had been reduced to a dresser and a box under the bed. The rest was for storage. My life, packed away. I stared at the ceiling for hours. I didn't cry. There were no tears left. As I listened to the faint hum of the fan, only one thought ran through my mind. How did we end up here? Going back to the beginning isn't easy. Sometimes it's better not to touch old wounds. But now I know it's necessary. 3 years ago, after Walter died, the house felt enormous. At first, the silence was gentle, almost comforting, like an echo that kept me company. But over time, that quiet turned into a pit. So when Ethan asked for help, I didn't hesitate for a second. Mom, Sabrina lost her job. We're behind on rent. I don't know what to do. Come to the house, I said without thinking. There's plenty. They arrived one January afternoon, Lila holding their hands, 3 big suitcases behind them. I had prepared the guest room, changed the sheets, even bought a new lamp. I was happy. My family was back. Lila hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, "I missed you so much, Grandma." I thought everything would be fine. But over time, I started noticing little things. Sabrina never looked me in the eye. She was always busy, always irritated. At first, I blamed stress, the pressure of unemployment, the adjustment. Then came the comments. "Your mom doesn't respect boundaries," she told Ethan when she thought I couldn't hear. "She's always around, like the house only belongs to her." And yes, it was mine, legally, fully, in my name. But I didn't say anything. I didn't want conflict. Little by little, the house began to change. I kept cooking. My modest pension covered electricity, gas, and part of the groceries. Ethan had found a job, but it wasn't steady. Sabrina still didn't work, though she wore new clothes every month. Still, I began to feel unnecessary, or at least that's how they made me feel. One night, Sabrina asked me not to sit with them at dinner because they needed to talk as a couple. The next day, my chair was gone. They had taken it from the table. Yet I kept making breakfast, shopping, taking Lila to school whenever Sabrina had a migraine or was too busy. I became a shadow that kept their routine alive without anyone noticing. Until one morning, Ethan asked if I could put the house under his name. He said it would be more practical, that in case of an emergency, it was better to have everything in order. I looked at him for a long time and did it. I went to the notary, signed the papers, handed them over, trusted him. I never thought they'd make me pay for it. A month later, my room was reduced, my private bathroom shared, my independence was erased. I turned into part of the background. No one asked how I was doing. No one listened. Except for Lila, she was still my light. Every night she climbed into my bed even if Sabrina got upset about it. She told me what she learned at school, drew me flowers, told me she loved me so much. She was the only not that I had anywhere to go. I had already given everything I had. That night, after Ethan's comment, I understood something. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't just a bad moment. It wasn't something said without thinking. It was what he meant, what he felt, what he believed. And then, for the first time in years, I felt something inside me break. But it wasn't pain. It was clarity. I sat in front of the cold oven, looked at the pot of rice, still warm, then grabbed my old notebook, the one I used for recipes, and wrote just one line. You are more than this. The next morning I got up early, made coffee, brushed my hair, and put on the blue dress Walter always said made me look like a summer sky. Then I left. I didn't say where I was going. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't take a suitcase. I left with purpose. I didn't really know where I was going, but my feet did. Sometimes your body knows before your mind does. I crossed 2 streets, past a bakery that still smelled of fresh bread, and stopped in front of a small cafe I hadn't visited in years. It was a modest place with hanging plants by the door and wrought iron chairs outside. A wooden sign read, "The Willow." I hesitated for a second, but inside, there she was, sitting behind the counter flipping through a magazine, her hair in a messy bun and glasses sliding down her nose. She looked up, frowned for a moment like she didn't recognize me, then her eyes widened. "Marjorie," she exclaimed with a smile that gave me back a piece of youth. My God, what a surprise. I didn't know what to say. My hands were shaking. Della had been my closest friend when we were young. We'd been inseparable until life sent us in different directions. She chose to travel, study abroad, marry a man she later left. I stayed in town, married Walter, raised Ethan, spent my life as a homemaker. She lived 1,000 lives. I lived in a loop. Still, in that moment, time didn't matter. We hugged as if we had seen each other yesterday. "What brings you here?" she asked, pouring me coffee without even asking, as if she knew I needed it. "I don't know. I just needed to get out of my house." "Then you came to the right place," she said, pointing to a table by the window. "No one rushes here, no one demands anything, and the coffee's always hot." We sat down, and I told her bits and pieces of what had happened. Not everything, not yet, but enough for her to know something inside me had cracked. Della listened without interrupting. She only frowned once when I mentioned Ethan's words. Then she was quiet for a few seconds. "You've always been stronger than you think," she finally said. I laughed, doubtful. "I don't look like it. Because they taught you to stay quiet, to sacrifice, to never ask for anything. But that's not strength, Marjorie. That's submission. And you can step out of it." I didn't answer, but those words stayed inside me like seeds. I went back home before noon. Sabrina looked at me from the couch, frowning. "Where were you?" "Just out for a walk." Without saying anything? Ethan was worried. A lie. He hadn't even noticed I was gone. But I said nothing. I went upstairs, closed my door, and lay down. Lila came in soon after. "Grandma, are you okay?" "Yes, sweetheart, just a little tired." She curled up next to me. Her warmth was a balm. She told me about a drawing she'd made in class of a woman with a cape flying over a city. "She's a hero." I called her Blue Marjorie. "After me?" "Of course. You're my hero." I didn't cry, but it was hard to swallow. That night, while everyone slept, I wrote another line in my notebook. I don't need permission to start over. The next few days felt different. I was the same person, but something in me had shifted. I no longer jumped up when Sabrina demanded something. I didn't rush to set the table or compliment every dish the moment it was served. It wasn't rebellion, it was dignity. Small acts of resistance that no one noticed, at least not at first. One Thursday afternoon, I went back to the cafe. Della was waiting for me with a tray of muffins and 2 cups of coffee. We sat outside on the patio. She told me about her travels and how she decided to open the place after her divorce. She'd done it with her savings and a small inheritance. She showed me old photos. We laughed a lot. I felt alive. "Why don't you come by more often?" she said. "You could even help me with some recipes. I know you're an amazing cook." "Work here? I don't see it as work. I see it as taking back control." I went home filled with both excitement and fear. That night, while we were eating dinner, I mentioned casually, "I stopped by a friend's cafe today." She offered to let me help in the kitchen. Ethan didn't look up. Sabrina did. Work? At your age? Yes. Why not? Because you don't need to. You already have your pension. Besides, who's going to watch Lila when we're not home? Lila is 12. She can walk to school on her own. And I need something for myself. Silence fell over the table. No one supported me, but they didn't forbid it either. So I went back to the cafe. The first few days I felt clumsy, slow, out of place. But Della encouraged me. She taught me how to use the register, how to work the new espresso machine, how to organize the displays. She even let me decorate a small corner with some antique things I had kept at home. A pendulum clock, a set of china my mother had passed down, a vase with dried daisies. Customers started coming in curious about that nostalgic corner. I greeted them with a smile. I felt useful, seen, worthy. One day, I met Arthur. He walked in slowly, cane in hand, wearing a kind smile. He ordered tea with honey and sat down to read the newspaper. He came back every Thursday. Sometimes we talked about books, other times about politics. He told me he was a retired lawyer, intelligent, kind, always well-dressed. He liked listening more than talking. He made me feel respected. One afternoon, while we were closing, Della looked at me with a mischievous grin. "I think Arthur likes you." I laughed nervously. "Don't be ridiculous." "Why? You're a beautiful woman, Marjorie. You've lived, you've loved. Why couldn't you do it again?" I didn't know what to say. I wasn't ready to think about that, but it felt nice to hear. One Friday when I came home, I found my things piled in the living room. Clothes, books, a box of— "What's all this?" I asked. Sabrina crossed her arms and said without a trace of emotion, "We need the space. We're turning that room into an office. We set up a spot for you in the laundry room. There's a mat." I couldn't breathe. Not from humiliation, but from how cold it was. "And Ethan, does he know? Did he sign off on this? Remember, the house isn't yours anymore." I said nothing. I walked over, picked up a photo of Walter, Ethan, and me when he was little. Then I went upstairs. I slept in the laundry room. That night I wrote one last line in my notebook. "The day is coming when they'll stop underestimating me." I barely slept. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. The laundry room smelled of dampness and old detergent. Every sound in the house echoed against the concrete walls. But what kept me awake wasn't the noise. It was memory. Not of what happened that night, but of everything I thought about all the dinners I had cooked with care. All the times I had watched over Lila when she was sick. The nights I'd gotten up quietly so I wouldn't bother anyone. Every sharp word I'd swallowed without reply. When exactly had I become invisible in my own home? The next morning I showered early and got dressed as always, wearing my favorite blouse and the embroidered scarf my mother had given me years ago. Sabrina didn't even look at me when I left. Ethan locked himself in his office, claiming he had an urgent video call. I didn't eat breakfast. I wasn't hungry. I walked to the cafe with a heaviness in my chest that refused to lift. But when I opened the door to the willow room and heard the small bell ring, something inside me fell back into place. Della noticed my expression immediately. "What happened now?" "They kicked me out of my room." She stopped cleaning the coffee maker and stared at me as if to make sure she'd heard me right. "They kicked you out? They need space? They're turning your room into an office?" Della took off her apron with a sharp movement and came closer. "You can't keep letting this happen, Marjorie. This isn't normal, or fair, or human. It's your house. Legally, I don't have any rights left. Maybe not, but morally, they have no right to treat you this way." Then she took my hand. "There are ways to defend yourself. I know someone who could help you. He's a lawyer, a good one. His name is Arthur." "Arthur? The customer?" "Yes. He sometimes gives legal advice. Even though he's retired, he doesn't charge. He does it because he believes in justice." "I don't know, Della. I don't want to take things that far. And what do you think this is? Sleeping among rags and buckets? Seeing your things piled up like trash?" I had no words. She was right. Every day that passed, I convinced myself I deserved the bare minimum. That I should be grateful for a roof and a plate of food, even if they came laced with contempt. But that wasn't the life I wanted. Arthur stopped by that afternoon. Della had told him everything. With that calm, steady manner of his, he sat with me, notebook in hand. "The first thing you should know," he said, "is that even though you transferred the property, if you can prove you did it under pressure or without fully understanding the consequences, we could file for nullification based on coercion. There's also case law recognizing the rights of elderly people in situations of family vulnerability. And what does that mean? In plain English? It means that if we can show emotional manipulation or abuse, or at least secure a fair space in the house, or compensation." I looked at him in disbelief. "And how do you prove something like that? With witnesses, with your notebook, for example. If you've kept a record of what's been happening, that helps. And if Lila supports you, even better." I felt a knot in my stomach. I didn't want to involve my granddaughter, but I knew she was already part of it, just by loving me. I thanked Arthur. That night, I went home determined to talk to Ethan. I waited for Sabrina to go to their room, then found him in the kitchen pouring a glass of water. "I need to talk to you." "Not now, Mom. I'm tired." "No, now, because if I don't, it'll make me sick." Ethan turned and looked at me like he didn't recognize me. "What's wrong?" "It hurts, all of this. It hurts that I gave up my home, my memories, everything I built for you, and now I sleep in a corner like I don't belong here." "It's not like that." "Yes, it is, and you know it. I never asked for anything. I just wanted to help, to be close, to care for Lila. But you threw me out of my room like I didn't matter." Ethan clenched his jaw. He didn't say a word. After a moment, he walked away. The next day, I sat with Lila in the backyard. She had a storybook in her hands but noticed how quiet I was. "What's wrong, Grandma?" "I need to do something important, sweetheart." "Anything. Could you write down how they treat me here? I know you've seen it." She looked down. "Is it for a trial?" "Not exactly, but I need evidence to protect myself." Lila nodded slowly, then hugged me. "I don't want you to leave. I won't leave without fighting." In the days that followed, Arthur and I worked quietly. He taught me how to document every detail, how to speak without my voice shaking. Della supported me completely, giving me flexible hours at the cafe, advice, and most importantly, company. I never felt alone during that time. One afternoon, when I got home, I found my sewing box on the floor. Some needles were broken, threads scattered, my old scissors rusted. It was my most cherished possession. I picked it up carefully, went upstairs without saying a word, and that night I knew my decision was made. The next morning, I took all my papers. Arthur went through them carefully, then looked up. "We're ready. Just tell me when you want to start the process." "Now." "Then be ready, Marjorie, because once this starts, there's no turning back." I looked at him firmly. "I don't want to go back." We filed the case on a Friday morning. Arthur delivered it personally to the courthouse and explained that now we had to wait for the official notice to be sent to Ethan and Sabrina. Even after taking such a strong step, I went home with a lump in my throat. I felt torn apart. Part of me felt proud for taking that step, and another part was crushed by the thought of facing my own son in court. But there was no turning back. It wasn't revenge. It was dignity. The next few days passed in heavy silence. I didn't speak to them either. Sabrina moved through the house like she lived in her own world, rearranging things, giving quiet orders to Lila, pretending I didn't. Ethan avoided even looking at me. Only Lila stayed close, sitting by my side every night with her books or in silence, holding my hand. One afternoon, while I was in the kitchen, the doorbell rang over and over. I went to open it. It was a court officer. Ethan came downstairs, hearing the voices, and froze when he saw the man holding an envelope. "Ethan Hale?" the officer asked. "Yes. Court notice. You have a set period to respond." He handed Ethan the envelope, had him sign. The silence that followed split through the house like a crack. Sabrina came down right away and snatched the envelope from Ethan's hands. "What is this?" Ethan read it quietly. His lips tightened. "It's from Mom. She filed a lawsuit." Sabrina looked at me like I'd just spat in her face. "What kind of low move is this?" "A defense." "I'm done staying silent." She laughed bitterly. "And what do you think you'll achieve by taking our house?" "I just want my right to live with dignity, to not be invisible, to not be treated like an old piece of furniture." "This is betrayal," Ethan shouted suddenly. "After everything we did for you, what did you do for me? You took my room, turned me into a burden, used my pension as if it were yours." Lila appeared behind us quietly. She had heard everything. She walked over and stood beside me. I'm with Grandma, Dad. Ethan looked at her. What are you saying? Grandma doesn't deserve this. I've seen how you treat her. It's not fair. Sabrina let out a disbelieving laugh. Perfect. Now the kid's taking sides. Ethan lowered his eyes. He said nothing. Sabrina stormed upstairs, and the door slammed shut. My son looked at me for a long time. There was no hate in his eyes. Something worse. Shame. Was this really necessary? Yes, I answered calmly. Because I tried everything before. I talked, but you didn't change, and I'm done disappearing. Ethan said nothing more. That night the house was quieter than ever, like something had broken, and we all knew it couldn't be fixed. The following days were tense. Sabrina acted like a stranger. She brushed against my shoulder on purpose when she passed by. She left doors open so the noise would echo into the laundry room where I slept. She changed mealtimes. Sometimes they didn't serve me food at all, but it didn't hurt the same. I knew I had to write it all down, document everything. Every insult became evidence. Arthur accompanied me to the first hearings. Telling my story in front of strangers was both humiliating and freeing. I told everything. How I gave up my house out of love, how they pushed me aside, how I slowly lost my place. Lila had written a letter that Arthur presented to the judge. Her words were so pure, so honest, that even the clerk had to look away. My grandmother has always been there. She took care of me when no one else could. I saw when they shut her out, when they stopped talking to her, when they pretended she didn't exist. I don't understand how anyone could treat the person who gave us everything like that. Arthur read it aloud in his steady voice. That was when I realized my granddaughter had more courage than most adults. I smiled at her from the stand. She sat in the back row and met my eyes, her gaze shining. Meanwhile, Della became. She gave me strength whenever I faltered. She reminded me who I had been before all this. One day she took me for a walk in a nearby park. She told me about her life, how she had traveled alone at 50, the choices that distanced her from her family, the wounds and scars that took years to heal. Freedom doesn't come all at once, Marjorie. It's built slowly, and it hurts. But once you reach it, there's no going back. That sentence. One morning we received notice that a mediation hearing had been scheduled. It was the last chance to reach an agreement without a ruling. I went with my heart tight in my chest. Arthur explained that if Ethan agreed, we could make a written deal, a private room, free access to shared spaces, respect, and a fair portion of my pension. We waited in the small room. They arrived late. Sabrina walked in as if she were coming back from a party. Ethan, on the other hand, when the mediator explained the terms, Sabrina stood up in outrage. This is blackmail. It's an agreement, Arthur said. And it's voluntary. No one's forcing you. But if you don't sign, it goes to trial. Then the judge decides. Ethan swallowed hard and looked at me. For a second, I thought he might agree. But Sabrina touched his arm, whispered something, and he lowered his eyes. We don't accept. The mediator nodded. Then the trial will proceed. We left in silence. That night, without saying a word, I packed a small box with a few important things: photographs, old letters, a handkerchief my mother had embroidered, and Lila's letter. I hid it in a corner of the laundry room, wrapped in a plastic bag like a treasure, because it was, not for its material worth, but because it represented what they could never take from me. My memories, my truth, my story. And now, my decision not to stay silent, not ever again. The following weeks grew colder, heavier, not because of the weather, but because of the air inside that house. Everything turned quiet, like the stillness before a storm that everyone knew was coming. I moved carefully, as if each step might trigger another burst of shouting or cutting glances. Sabrina seemed determined to prove I had no power left. Every day she found new ways to remind me. She changed the lock on the hallway bathroom, and now I could only use the one in the laundry room where there wasn't even hot water. She put latches on the pantry where they kept basic food and left me the old bread, unsalted rice, and watery coffee. I didn't complain. I just wrote everything down. Arthur had told me to document every hostile act. I kept a notebook hidden among my books, recording dates, words, and actions. I was no longer a resigned victim but a quiet observer, collecting evidence with patience. Lila, meanwhile, was becoming more defiant. She started staying at her friend Anna's house. She asked her father to let her sleep at Della's some nights, and while Ethan allowed it at first, Sabrina quickly put an end to it. She said Della was filling my head with nonsense and that she didn't want her daughter influenced by a crazy old woman. Lila fought back. I had never seen her yell like that. Sabrina slapped her. I saw everything from the cracked doorway. I ran to my granddaughter, pulled her into my arms, shielding her like she was still a little girl. Sabrina screamed at me to stay out of it, that it wasn't my business. Ethan came down late. By then, Lila had locked herself in her room, and I stood trembling, my hand pressed to my chest. He didn't say a word. No anger, no defense, no comfort. He just looked at Sabrina the way someone watches a fire, knowing it's already burned everything down. The next day, Lila didn't go to school. She stayed with me all. I made her hot chocolate, the same way I used to when she was little. She asked me if I'd ever been happy. I told her yes, many times, though I hadn't remembered it in a long while. She gave me a sad smile. I want you to be happy again, Grandma. Maybe that's not for me anymore, sweetheart. Yes, it is. You just have to believe it. That night, I wrote in my notebook, Lila still believes in me. I need to believe in myself too. A few days later, we received a notice from the court. The trial date had been set. Arthur called to explain the details. Hearing that we had a formal hearing made me tremble, not from fear, but from the realization that what was at stake was more than a house. It was my dignity, my place in the world. Ethan and Sabrina found out from the official mail. I didn't say anything. Neither did they. They locked themselves in their room for hours, whispering. That night, Sabrina left without saying where she was going. I saw him sitting there, head in his hands, as if the weight of the entire universe had fallen on him. I went over, not out of pity, but because I needed to. Are you okay? I asked. He looked up, his eyes red, as if he'd been crying or hadn't slept in days. I don't know how we got here, Mom. Yes, you do. You just don't want to admit it. She told me you wanted to take the house, that you were going to throw us out. And you believed her? No, I know better. The silence between us was heavier than any words. Ethan, I don't want revenge. I don't want to destroy your life or Lila's. All I want is respect, peace, a space of my own. A quiet old age without fear. But you were fine before. No, before I stayed quiet. That's different. He didn't say anything else. He just nodded, like he finally understood something. Not everything, but something. He went to bed without looking at me again. The trial was getting closer. Della took me shopping, insisting I should show up confident, steady, like the woman I once was. She styled my hair, added a touch of makeup, and gave me a blue scarf she had brought from Morocco. She said it was for strength. That morning, when I looked in the mirror, I saw someone different, more grounded, more present, like I was finally beginning to recognize myself again. At the courthouse, Arthur was waiting with his briefcase, impeccable, calm, with that steady way of speaking that gave people confidence. He gave me a few last instructions, and then we went in. Ethan arrived alone. Sabrina refused to come. Lila was with Della, who had taken her to the park. I didn't want her to see any of it. Inside the courtroom, the judge watched us closely. He listened as Arthur laid out the facts, presented documents, photos, and witness statements. Then he read Lila's letter aloud. His tone changed. He paused several times, as if the weight of each word made it hard to go on. Ethan kept his eyes down. He didn't say a word. Only when it was his turn did he speak, offering no excuses, just an apology. He admitted his silence, his emotional neglect, his complicity through inaction. My mother doesn't deserve to live like this. I failed her as a son. I know that. The judge looked at him gravely. Are you willing to make it right? Ethan nodded. The judge took a moment before delivering his decision. Ethan was ordered to return my private room, grant me full access to shared spaces, respect my autonomy, and restore partial control over my income. The court also issued a formal warning for Sabrina, stating that any further hostile actions toward me could result in criminal charges. I left the courthouse in silence. Arthur walked me to the exit. Outside, Della and Lila were waiting. My granddaughter ran to me and hugged me so tightly that I felt my bones fall back into place. You won, Grandma. No, sweetheart, I just got back what I never should have lost. That night, I went home with my head held high. Ethan greeted me at the door. He offered me tea. He didn't say much, but his gestures were different. Sabrina was gone. She had gone to her mother's, furious about the ruling. I didn't know if she'd return, and I didn't care. I slept in the room that had once been mine. Clean, organized, with my things back in their place. I lit a candle, prayed in silence, and for the first time in years I fell asleep without fear. In the weeks after the trial, the house seemed to breathe differently. The air wasn't as heavy, and though peace hadn't fully returned, the open war had ended. Sabrina didn't come back right away. According to Ethan, she was taking time to think, though I suspected she was trying to guilt him into submission. I didn't comment. My role was no longer that of mediator or silent victim. I was a woman who had decided she would never again allow abuse, no matter who it came from. Ethan began to show small signs of remorse. He asked if I needed anything before going out, if I wanted to come along on errands. He even cooked a couple of times, something he'd never done before. I accepted his gestures carefully. It wasn't resentment that made me keep my distance. I didn't want to mistake kindness for redemption. Years of neglect couldn't be erased with a few kind acts. Lila, meanwhile, was closer than ever. She helped me organize my things, spent afternoons talking about everything and nothing, asked me to tell her stories about when her father was a boy. As I shared those good memories, I also began to piece together the broken parts of my own past. One afternoon, as we drank tea in the backyard, I used to think adults couldn't change. That if someone was selfish or cruel, they stayed that way forever. But you changed, Grandma. You got stronger. Maybe I didn't change, I told her. Maybe I just became who I was before I gave up. Then I can change too, right? I took her hand. There was a depth in her eyes I'd never seen before, the look of a child starting to understand how complicated the world really is. I told her yes, everyone can change, but first, and she already was. A week later, Sabrina came back. She walked into the house without saying a word, her lips pressed tight and her eyes down. Ethan hugged her like nothing had happened. I stayed silent. She passed by me as if I were invisible. In her mind, she still couldn't accept that I had won something. She believed her control was untouchable, but everything had shifted. Every time she tried to take charge, Ethan stopped her. Not harshly, but with a steadiness. He told her things were different now, that she had to respect the boundaries the law and simple decency had set. Sabrina looked at him with disdain, but held her tongue. She knew one wrong move could turn against her. The tension returned to the house, though it was quieter now, like something that buzzed under the surface. Sabrina no longer shouted or confronted me directly, but she left small provocations everywhere. Dirty dishes when she knew I needed them, changing the channel abruptly when I watched TV, whispering on the phone, clearly about me. I wrote it all down, the way Arthur had taught me. Not to report it, but for clarity. Keeping records kept me from doubting myself, from falling into that emotional trap I'd known too well. One night, I heard them arguing loudly. Sabrina shouted that he wasn't the same man anymore, that he was letting a bitter old woman control his life. He answered with, "She's not manipulating me, she's reminding me who I am." After that came a long silence, then heavy footsteps, and a door slamming shut. The next morning, Sabrina was gone again. I watched everything without getting involved. It wasn't my conflict anymore, it was theirs. I was on the outside now, and that space felt like freedom. Arthur called to check on me. I told him things at home were tense but manageable. He asked if I'd thought about moving. I said yes, many times, but I hadn't found the right place yet. He offered to help me look. He said he knew of a few senior communities that weren't nursing homes, but active, independent living places with workshops, activities, and freedom. The thought scared me at first, but then I realized maybe I deserved a space where I didn't have to measure every word or step. That night, Lila overheard my call and asked, "Are you going to leave? What do you think?" "I think you should do what makes you happy. But if you go, I want to visit you every weekend." I hugged her, her maturity, her loyalty. It moved me. She was the reflection of everything I had tried to nurture in this family. And though I'd failed in many ways, something had taken root in her. Days later, I got an unexpected call. It was my younger sister, Elaine. We hadn't spoken in years. She said she'd heard about everything that happened, that a mutual friend had seen the court ruling posted in the legal bulletin. She asked if she could come visit. I hesitated. We had unresolved history, old wounds that had never really healed. but there was something genuine in her voice. When she walked through the door, I felt a rush of emotions: nostalgia, mistrust, tenderness. We spent the whole afternoon talking. She apologized for not being. I confessed I had pulled away out of pride. Between tears and laughter, we remembered our childhood, the summers at Grandma's house, the mischief with our cousins. It was a necessary reunion. It reminded me that despite everything, I still had roots. I still had someone who cared. Elaine offered to let me stay at her place for a few days, to take a break. I told her I'd think about it. After she left, I sat in the rocking chair. The sun was setting, and the sky glowed gold and orange, like it was promising something. I didn't know what, but something. At that moment, I felt a deep certainty. I didn't have to stay where I wasn't welcome. Not out of pride or resentment, but because I deserved better. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting to stay, but knowing when it's time to go. And though I didn't know when that day would come, when I went back inside, I saw an old photo of Ethan and Lila in a dusty frame. I picked it up, wiped it clean, and placed it carefully on the shelf. Then I went to bed, at peace. For the first time in years, real peace. After Elaine's visit, something inside me shifted. It was as if our conversation had brushed away a layer of old dust covering my memories. I began to see that the problem wasn't just Sabrina or even Ethan's emotional neglect. It ran deeper. It was the habit of making myself small to avoid conflict, of staying quiet to keep the peace, of putting my needs last just to hold a fragile family together. I didn't want to live like that anymore. I had spent 66 years carrying guilt that wasn't mine, accepting scraps of affection as if they were feasts, waiting for approval from people who... I wondered why it had taken me so long to wake up, but I also understood that sometimes you only see clearly once you've hit the bottom. That clarity pushed me to make a decision. I began looking for a place of my own. I didn't want anything fancy or modern, just a space where I could have peace, dignity, and above all, freedom. I talked to Arthur about it. He sent me several options, and I took my time looking through them. One in particular caught my attention. It was a small complex of apartments for independent seniors, with gardens, a community library, and art workshops. It wasn't a retirement home. It was a place for people like me, people who still had things to do, to learn, to feel. Just imagining myself there filled me with a mix of nerves and excitement. I told Lila about it. She listened quietly, then with tears in her eyes, hugged me. She said she was proud of me, that she used to think grandmothers existed to take care of everyone else, but now she understood that we deserved to take care of ourselves too. That night, I slept with a peace I hadn't known before. I didn't dream of the past anymore. I dreamed of the future. Sabrina came back a few days later, her tone quieter, almost restrained. Maybe she had accepted the new reality. She didn't argue or try to assert control, but she also didn't reach out. It was as if I no longer existed in her world. She looked at me warily, like she couldn't understand why I was still there, so calm, so unbothered. But that didn't matter. I wasn't afraid anymore. Her contempt no longer had power over me. A person who can't manipulate loses their strength, and that truth was eating at her. Ethan began showing interest in my decision to move. At first, he seemed confused, unsure why I'd want to. I explained it wasn't about running away, but about growing. You still grow at 66. It wasn't abandonment, it was honoring my own story, my wounds, my healing. It took him time to process, but he didn't try to stop me. He even offered to help with the move. I politely declined. I wanted to do it my way. Around that time, Della invited me to a literary gathering at a local cultural center, and I decided to go. When I arrived, I was surprised to see so many women my age, sharing stories, readings, poems. I felt part of something again. For the first time in years, I wasn't just Ethan's mother or Lila's grandmother. I was Estefania, and that was enough. After the event, one of the coordinators approached me and invited me to join a memoir writing workshop. I accepted. Writing had always drawn me in, though I'd never had the courage. I sat in front of a blank page and began to write my story, not with anger or bitterness, but with truth. Honest, raw truth. And as I wrote, it felt like each word washed something clean inside me. Every page was a step toward freedom. One Saturday afternoon, as Lila and I drank tea, I told her I'd chosen the apartment I wanted. I showed her the photos. Her eyes lit up. "When are you moving?" she asked, her voice trembling. Can I help decorate your new home? Of course, sweetheart. It'll be our project. That shared excitement felt like a balm. We started planning the curtain colors, balcony plants, and pictures for the walls. We laughed like we were building a fairy tale castle, and in a way, we were. A few days later, I got an unexpected call from Della. She was in town for a medical appointment and wanted to meet. We met at a cafe. Seeing her again felt like finding. She listened closely as I told her everything that had happened. She congratulated me for winning the case, for choosing to move, for breaking the cycle. She said so many women spend decades trapped in toxic family dynamics that I was the exception. I didn't know what to say. I didn't feel exceptional, I just felt tired. But I understood her point. Most stay silent. I couldn't anymore. When I returned home, Sabrina was waiting in the kitchen. She looked at me with defiance and irritation. So you're leaving? Yes, I said calmly. Soon. And I suppose you're taking Lila too, aren't you? No, Lila's your daughter. I'm just taking my freedom. She gave a cold laugh and a cutting stare. Don't fool yourself into thinking this makes you a better person. Walking away is just another form of cowardice. I stayed quiet for a moment, then looked her. I'm leaving because I finally understand I don't have to stay where I'm not wanted. That's not weakness. That's dignity. She left without another word. I sat down to breathe. The moment didn't hurt. It didn't anger me. It confirmed I was doing the right thing. The next day, I started packing. Lila helped eagerly. We sorted books, photos, memories. Every item carried a story, but I didn't cling to them with sadness. It was a necessary a part of me was saying goodbye to that house, not just as a place, but as a symbol of everything I had endured for far too long. Ethan would sometimes walk by quietly, watching me. I could tell it wasn't easy for him, but I also saw that he respected my choice. One night, as I was organizing my papers, he came over and said, "I know I wasn't the son you deserved. Don't punish yourself, Ethan. What matters is what you decide to do from now on." Will you forgive me? I don't need to forgive you. I just want you to be better. For yourself. For Lila. We hugged. It was brief, awkward, but sincere. Everything was ready. All that was left was to set the date. I sat down with my notebook and made a list of things I wanted to do in my new life. Learn to dance, take painting classes, visit small towns, read all the books I had put off, dream again, at my age, like I was 20, because the soul doesn't age when you keep it alive. Then I realized the end of one chapter wasn't a tragedy, it was an open door, a new story waiting to be written, and this time I would be the main character from the very first line. The morning I moved out was gray but calm. It felt like the sky understood, keeping quiet company. I woke up early. I hadn't slept much, not from sadness, but from the quiet thrill of it all. I dressed slowly, made myself coffee, and walked through the house one last time. For years, it had felt like a place that wasn't really mine, even though I'd lived there. Every wall seemed to whisper memories that faded like smoke. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt closure. Like stepping off a stage after playing a role for too long, Ethan appeared in the doorway, his eyes swollen. He didn't speak, he just hugged me. I ran my hand over the back of his neck, the way I used to when he was little. No words were needed. Lila arrived soon after. She carried a plant we'd picked together for my new balcony, a lush, deep green ficus. Strong. Just how I wanted to feel. She held it proudly as we loaded the car that would take us toward a new beginning. Sabrina didn't say goodbye. I didn't see her that morning, didn't hear footsteps or doors closing. The silence was her last word, and I didn't need more. Her absence didn't hurt. It was part of the relief. The drive was short. Lila talked nonstop, making plans for the next weekend. She wanted to stay over, meet my new neighbors, and decorate my reading corner. I listened, my heart full. That little girl had been my anchor through the storm. Because of her, I remembered who I was. We arrived mid-morning. The building had a modest entrance, lined with blooming bougainvilleas. The concierge greeted us kindly and handed me the keys. When I stepped inside my new home, I took a deep breath. It smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. Sunlight poured through a wide window, warming the room with a gentle glow. Lila ran to pull back the curtains and exclaimed that the balcony was perfect for our reading afternoons. We got to work hanging curtains, making the bed, placing books on a small shelf. It wasn't much, but it was enough. At lunchtime, we sat on the floor over a makeshift tablecloth and toasted with lemonade. She looked at me and said, "Grandma, this feels like a I told her it was because, finally, I was happy too. The next few days were full of discovery. I met Clara, my next-door neighbor, a 72-year-old watercolor teacher at the local arts center. She invited me to her class. I went. My first brushstrokes were clumsy, but they made me laugh. I hadn't laughed like that in years. I signed up for an art history course, a meditation class, and an advanced writing workshop. My days filled with things. I wasn't afraid. I felt like I was expanding. Every time Lila visited, we shared our stories like two friends catching up. She told me about school, her doubts, her dreams, and I listened with full attention. I wasn't the kind of grandmother who just gave advice. I was a woman learning to listen, to be present without judgment, and she thanked me with the purest affection. One afternoon, while walking through the park surrounding the complex, I noticed a woman sitting alone on. She was crying softly. I approached gently, without intruding, and handed her a tissue. She looked at me with surprise, then gratitude. We started talking. Her name was Dolores. She had lost her husband not long ago. She didn't have children. She told me she felt invisible, like no one heard her anymore. I shared my own wounds with her, how I'd spent years being a shadow inside my own family. For the first time in a long while, I saw my pain reflected in someone else's eyes. From that day on, we started meeting every week. We walked together, exchanged books, and sometimes cried without shame. Loneliness hurts less when it's shared. A month passed, and I felt more alive than ever. One morning, I got an email from Ethan inviting me to have lunch. I agreed. We met at a small cafe near his office. He was nervous, it showed in his eyes. He told me he had started therapy, that he needed to understand why he had allowed. He apologized again, this time with a humility I hadn't seen before, and I believed him. He spoke about Sabrina, how their marriage was falling apart, how he was starting to repeat the same mistakes with Lila. I told him the bravest thing he could do was break that pattern now, before he caused more harm. We hugged before parting ways, a long, quiet embrace. I watched him walk toward his office with shoulders that looked a little lighter. That night, I sat down with my journal and wrote a line. Love is not sacrifice, it's freedom. I repeated it to myself several times. It became my new compass. A few days later, Della came to visit. She brought me a book she knew I'd love. We sat on the balcony, laughing and reminiscing. She said I looked different, brighter. I told her about my classes, my walks, my small garden. She smiled and hugged me tightly. I told her I wouldn't have made it this far without. She said every step had been mine, that she had only reminded me I still had legs. That night, I slept deeply. One Sunday, Lila asked if she could make a video for school about the bravest woman you know. She recorded me telling my story. I spoke naturally, without drama, just truth. The video spread among her classmates, and several grandmothers reached out. One wrote, "Thank you for saying what so many of us." Another said, "I thought it was too late to start over, but now I know it's not." I cried, reading their messages not from sadness, but from hope. My story, with all its scars, had somehow helped light the way for others. That was a gift I never expected. The deepest change, though, was within me. I no longer felt guilty for choosing peace. I no longer questioned whether I did everything for myself, and that wasn't selfish, it was justice. Every morning, I looked in the mirror and recognized myself not as the perfect mother or ideal grandmother, but as a woman who survived her own story, who rewrote it and made it her own. One afternoon, I got a call from Lila. She was crying. She'd had a fight with her mother and felt misunderstood. I told her to come over. When she arrived, I made her bed with tenderness, and as she fell asleep, I stroked her hair and thought how beautiful it was to be a safe place, not out of obligation, but out of love. How beautiful it was to give warmth without losing yourself. In that moment, I understood something else. True freedom isn't being alone, it's choosing who to share your life with. And now, finally, I could choose. The ending didn't come with fireworks or drama, it came as a whisper, a moment of clarity in the middle of an ordinary day. One afternoon, I got an unexpected call from Ethan. His voice was softer, more human. He said he wanted to see me. to talk honestly, without masks or excuses. My heart raced not from fear, but from the hope of what might unfold. When he arrived, I welcomed him with a mix of nostalgia and quiet optimism. We talked for hours. He admitted how hard it had been to face the harm he'd caused, not just to me, but to Lila and to himself. He acknowledged that Sabrina's influence had been toxic, but he also took responsibility for his choices. It wasn't an empty apology. It was a promise to change, to be a better father and a better son. I felt something between us rekindle, something I thought was gone forever. That meeting didn't erase the past, but it opened a path toward forgiveness and reconciliation. It wasn't easy or quick. There were moments of doubt and pain, but also of growth. Lila began to trust her father again, and I found the strength to let go of resentment and build something new with them without forgetting the wounds. Healing isn't forgetting, it's learning to live with the scars that shape who we are. Della remained my constant support, her friendship a steady anchor on uncertain days and a shared joy in moments of triumph. With her, I rediscovered laughter, curiosity, and the thrill of dreaming again. Together, we planned a trip, a small adventure we'd long postponed. It became a journey that restored my faith in the world and in myself. We walked streets I'd never imagined, breathed new air, and immersed ourselves in cultures that taught me life always has more to offer, no matter your age. Sabrina faded from our lives, at least from my present. I didn't need revenge or confrontation. Her quiet disappearance was enough. In her absence came a peace. I never expected the kind that grows when you release what hurts and make space for what heals. I felt free from expectations, free from undeserved guilt, free to simply be myself. The little garden on my balcony thrived. Every green leaf was a promise, every bloom, a celebration. I cared for it with devotion. Sometimes, Lila and I sat there reading, dreaming. That connection with the earth taught me that life is a constant cycle of planting, waiting, and blooming, that you can be reborn as many times as you need. My pension, once used to belittle me, became a symbol of independence. With it, I learned to manage my finances, plan my expenses, and live on my own terms. I no longer relied on anyone to survive, to decide, to live. That gave me a dignity no insult could ever take away. The day Lila came home with a medal from an art contest, her eyes sparkled brighter than ever. She said everything she'd learned from me had inspired her to be brave, to follow her passions without fear. That was the greatest reward I could ever receive. My legacy wasn't material possessions or silent sacrifices. It was love, and the lesson that I finally understood that the best gift I gave myself was the permission to be happy without conditions, without apology. To be happy on my own terms. That happiness was my quiet revenge against those who doubted me. I didn't need to prove anything. My life spoke for itself. In this new chapter, I built a home that was truly mine. A place where laughter replaced tears, where light overcame shadows, where love lived in simple but powerful. A home not defined by possessions, but by the peace I had fought so hard to earn. And as I write these words, I know my story isn't perfect or unique, but it's real. It's the story of a woman who found her voice when everyone thought it was too late, who realized she deserved love, respect, and dignity, who learned to love herself and let go of what held. Because in the end, it isn't the pension, the house, or the years that define a person, it's the ability to reinvent yourself, to rise again and again, and to keep moving forward with an open heart, ready to embrace whatever good life still has to give. That, no one can ever take from me. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stories of Mom Donna, where every story reminds us that strength, courage, and hope have no age limit.